Hi, I'm Eric Hammaker, Senior Field Tech Rep for Chumco CPG Dryvit brand. Today I'm going to be going through the application of the Canadian Outsulation Mineral Wool System. We'll be going through some of the tools that you'll be needing, the materials, and the proper application of the system. So before we get started, I'd like to bring in Amanda Sinica, one of our lead engineers, which you'll be able to review codes and some of the benefits that you will find to the Canadian Outsulation Mineral Wool System. Amanda?
Thanks, Eric. I'm Amanda Sinica. I am Senior Technical Specialist with Dryvit, division of Chumco CPG. I just wanted to explain the code requirements in section 3155 of the National Building Code, Provincial Codes, and now the Ontario Building Code. Any building over 3 stories that is unsprinklered cannot have combustible insulation, which rules out our traditional EPS, expanded polystyrene EATs, that we have been using in retrofit situations in particular. So there's tons of buildings that retrofit applications are required, and now it has to be over 3 stories, unsprinklered. It has to be a mineral wool system. Ontario recently changed their building code. There used to be an exemption in 3238 that with the right testing, you could still use an EPS system. That is gone. So across the country, you need a mineral wool system.
Amanda, if I could ask you, could you expand on the difference between the Outsulation 5000 and the Canadian Mineral Wool System?
Sure. The Outsulation 5000 system have been a Dryvit staple for years. This new version of our mineral wool system has a number of differences and improvements. Adhesive on the back of the boards is no longer required. The boards have grooves cut in the back for drainage, very similar to the Outsulation MD system. And this also satisfies the pro-indemnity insurance requirements in the province of Ontario. No drainage mat is required anymore. It's a mechanically fastened system. And I think the last improvement is that there is a means for drainage on the bottom of, expansion joints, bottom of the system. We have some room for drainage, which with the mineral wool is an added benefit. New system has a longer warranty. So those are the prime differences.
Thank you, Amanda.
My pleasure.
So now we're going to get into the actual tools that we'll be using during the application of the system. And now let's review the tools and the equipment that you'll be using for the application. We want to make sure that you have the proper safety equipment that is required in your region. In looking for tape, you may be using a staple gun, paddle mixer, the appropriate size drill motor, on the completion and to scoop out your base coat, butt scoop, the desired trowel. You can use a hawk. The margin trowel. Corner trowel to help you clean up the edges. May need scissors. A cordless spiral gun. And a tape measure. And now let's review the materials that you'll be using on the project. And now let's review the materials that will be used in the installation of the system. You'll be using the backstop NTX texture or smooth. In treating the joints, you treat the joints with your Aquaflash mesh. You can also treat the joints with the Dymonic 100. When doing window openings or fenestrations, you can use, again, the Dymonic 100 on the sills, or you will use Aquaflash liquid along with the Aquaflash mesh. Now that those have been installed, you will then proceed to using the mineral wool material. You will see the mineral wool comes with grooves in it to promote drainability. This will be mechanically fastened with the appropriate E-joint fastener and washer. You will then be spotting the fasteners and base coating with Primus DM. You will only be able to use the Primus DM for this application. To detail the windows, to make sure you have the appropriate back wrap, you should use the detail mesh, 9.5 inch, followed with the body using standard plush mesh. If you decide to use a high impact mesh, you will use that along with the standard plus. No exceptions to that application. And finally, once you've reached the appropriate coatings and have it allowed to dry, the base coat to properly dry, you will then install the designed finish coat to texture, color, and specialty finish if desired. And with that, let's get into the installation of the system. So now let's review the acceptable substrates for the installation. First is the glass mat face chip sheathing or masonry substrate. Prior to that, you want to make sure you review to make sure that any broken board has been replaced and repaired properly. From that, now we can do the installation of our backstop NTX. In the installation of the backstop NTX, you want to properly treat the joints and the fastener heads, and then you can install the field with the backstop NTX, either smooth or textured. As you see here, we've already taken the liberty to take care of that just to help us with the installation. And you can see it properly coated. You don't see any of the joints and or the fastener heads. And with that, we'll be installing the mineral wool insulation with the E-jot fasteners. Let's move forward with the installation of the mineral wool board. As you can see, we completed the installation of the application of the backstop NTX. I've also placed lines on the demonstration wall here so you can see the placement of the metal studs in the wall. I want to make sure that we can place the mechanical fasteners in the mineral wool board properly. The mineral wool board will have 9 fasteners to a board. That will be 4 inches from the top and the bottom, 8 inches from the edges of the board, and then you will have 3 in the field. Let's move forward and show the placement and the proper installation of those fasteners. So let's proceed with the installation of the mineral board. What I'd like to show you is, you can see here we've placed markers here, again, so that you understand the placement and the proper placement of the E-jot fasteners. Now I'm going to ask Corey to assist me here and start the installation as I talk a little bit more about this. So during the installation, some of the things you want to be aware of. First of all, if you notice that Corey is actually wearing gloves, the purpose for that is the mineral wool is very much like a fiberglass insulation. There's fibers in that can be irritating to the skin. Then as Corey said this, he will be installing that. The fasteners themselves are going to be inset in the board a little bit. The purpose behind that is so that you can actually spot the fasteners. A mechanical fastener would be placed through the washer itself. If you look, there is a little plug that will be pressed down. The purpose of that is to cover the fastener itself so that we don't have an excess amount of base coat in there. And here's a simple demonstration of that application. I would also like to point out one thing with the board and the placement of the fasteners. Whenever possible, we want to make sure that the fasteners are placed in between the grooved foam board. That will make for a clean, drainable system. And now that we've completed the installation of the mineral wool board, I'd like to make a few points here. First and foremost, you notice how the boards that are up and below it have an actual seam that is offset. What we don't want to do is have our vertical seams line up on all of them. So we've offset it by 16 inches so that we make sure that we have 8 inches in, that we can hit all the metal studs. Second of all the mechanical fasteners in the washer heads have been sunk below the surface of the mineral wool, and the caps have been properly placed. And now that the mineral wool has been properly installed, we're going to get into the spotting of the fastener heads. So in preparation for spotting of the fasteners, we want to make sure we have the proper tools and materials on hand. What you're going to need is Primus DM. Again, I repeat, Primus DM. That is the only base coat that we can use within the system. And then you're going to want to have clean potable water to be added to that. Procedure that I typically will use is I'll take the potable water, put that in first. The purpose behind that is so that the base coat doesn't get stuck to the bottom, and you have you can get a complete mix. In this, as you're mixing this material, I mix it in portions of thirds. I kind of take a third of the base coat, the dry base, I just give it a light spin so that, again, base that's in there mixes up. Add the second third to it. And then finally, add the remaining. Now what you're going to find is you're most likely going to have to add additional water to get it to the consistency that you're looking for. You're going to want to mix this for about 2 minutes and then allow it to sit for a minimum of 10 minutes. What that 10 minutes does, it allows the moisture to penetrate, the water to penetrate the dry goods, fully hydrate them. Then you come back and do what we call break the false set. At that time, that will give you longevity on the workability of your base coat. Now that we've allowed the base coat to set for 10 minutes, what we want to do is remix this so that we can break the false set and then make it workable for our application. Well, now that we completed this, what we're going to want to make sure that we do is try to clean up so that there's no additional material on the wall so that we don't have to later come back and clean it. So I'm just going to touch it up. You just want to make sure that all of your fasteners are completely full so that you don't have to fill them in later. And we'll let this take up, and then we will come back and we'll coat this with the base coat and the mesh. So now the wear has been spotted, we want to make sure that we're addressing any outstanding issues that may be there. Primary fun thing that you're going to find is you're going to have gapping between some of your boards. In a perfect row, we wouldn't have that. The best method of application is to have slivers. And that is just taking some mineral wool board and cutting it in a triangulated shape. So in this application, you can see here, I have a gap that's open. I will just take a piece of this, and it does not necessarily have to go the whole way to the back. It just has to fill the front. And the purpose of that is so that we don't have an overabundance of base coat in there and that there would be a crack that would end up forming in that because of the thickness of the film. So again, I'm just taking these and filling these in the best that I can. Then what I'll do is I'll come back with a utility knife, make sure these are in there fairly firm. Take my utility knife and cut off the excess. Once that has been completed, now the wall is ready to start to base coat. Again, areas that you don't want to make sure you address is just make sure that this is free and clear of loose material. And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to start working on my back wrap. Back wrapping is typical. You want to make sure that your mesh is tied to the substrate, and then you're going to take your base coat, apply to the edges that you're using. You're going to want to look for the details in our application instructions to make sure you're detailing the back wrap on the drainable side of the board and also at the top of the board. In your back wrapping, what you're going to want to do is, if you're going to allow this to set up for the day and then come back and do the whole face, I would use a corner trowel to tool that up and clean that up. But since we're not doing that, I will clean those corners up when we're done here doing the face of the wall. Following the installation of the base coat, we're going to embed our standard plus mesh, which is a 6.0 mesh, pound mesh, into that. Yeah, you want to make sure is I have the detail mesh on each side. When you're installing your mesh at any time, you have an overlap of at least 2.5 inches onto the mesh previous to that. The purpose behind that is so that you don't have, it will prevent any cracking from occurring at those locations. So in the installation of this, the best application is to go across the top of the mesh and placement, and then come to the center of your mesh and push it out. The reason is to work your way out. The reason is if I decide to come up, and I'll demonstrate this, you come up, all of a sudden you get this happening. So the best method is to not do it that way. And then all you're going to do is come down the center and work your way out. I can come across, I can come down, across, and this will prevent you from getting any kinks in your wall or in your mesh on the wall. The other side you want to make sure of, again, you can see areas where I may have had mesh base coat a little bit thin. When I'm done with this, I should have no blue of the mesh showing through. It needs to be fully encapsulated. So I'm going to clean this up, and then I'll put just a little coat over top of it. And now I'm just going to do final cleanup so I don't have any trowel marks on this wall. With that being complete, one of the things I forgot to mention, with the mineral wool, you cannot rast the mineral wool. So what you're going to find is there's going to be undulations in that material. Best practice is to put your first coat on, make sure the mesh is embedded. From there, we'll let this take up, and we'll come back and put a second coat over it. It could be what is considered a sweet coat, which would be, with this application, I would make it a little bit thicker than the typical sweet coat, okay? Somewhere between my base coat and my sweet coat, somewhere in there, so that I can build up any low areas, so that I can remove any undulations or variations, so that I can have a monolithic wall. And that was the second coat over top. So yeah, I took out a lot of the undulations so you have a much better wall. Now that we've allowed our base coat to dry for a minimum of 24 hours, I just want to review the preparation of a wall. And I'd like to discuss some of the finishes that you want to use prior to me demonstrating. We would prefer that you use, or our recommendation would be to use a heavier texture such as quartz puts or sand pebble. In using the finer finishes, it will magnify the critical light when using those. So as we move forward, you can see on the wall several things. I want to point out, you can see your fasteners, your mechanical fasteners. You also see the board joints. The cause of that is you have the higher build of base coat in those areas, which dries slightly different. It protrudes a little bit more, or actually appears more prevalent to you. When you run your finishes, that will be covering those up. They should not appear in the final presentation of your finish. So now in preparation of the wall, you want to make sure you go back, look for burrs, high spots that may have occurred. I sometimes use my trowel. You can use a rubbing stone. So I'll go that, and I will clear those off prior to that. Now that that's done, I make sure that my finish has been pre-mixed, and then I'll start my application. Now that I've completed trying the material on the wall, what I want to do is I want us to go back to float out the product, the finish. And floating the finish side, you're going to take a plastic quote, make sure that it's damp, wet, clean. What I typically do is I always use my trowel, my to take off any of the excess on there. Then I'm floating this out. Our recommendation is that all the mechanics on the wall be floating it in the same fashion. You can do it counterclockwise, you can do it clockwise, you can do a figure eight. It doesn't matter, but you just want to make sure that all of your mechanics are doing the exact same technique. If there's a variation in that technique, you might see an overlap of where somebody does it clockwise, somebody does it counterclockwise. I always do a counterclockwise when I'm using it. And when I do this, my first go around is with a lot of pressure onto the finish. I'm just trying to knock out any trowel marks, any high spots to try to bring this back to level and take out some of the shadow marks. Then in my final go around, I will hold the trowel or the float very lightly and put just a minimal amount of pressure on that, so that what it'll do is it'll bring the texture out, it will roll the texture up to the surface. The other thing is, and you can hear the difference, and I'll try to demonstrate this to you, but when I'm actually floating this out the first time, I'm very much you can listen and you'll hear the difference in the pressure that I had. So what I'm going to do is show you my first go round and listen to the pressure. Okay? And I'm doing my final float. Now listen to the pressure. And that is just barely touching the surface of that, which is going to give you the final appearance that you're looking for. And that completes the training of the Dryvit Canadian Outsulation Mineral Wool System. If you would like to learn more, have any questions, or would like to be trained on the Outsulation system, please reach out and contact your local distributor or your local Dryvit sales rep. Thank you very much and have a great day.